and this is The Rape of Nature.
Mm.
Now, when you go outside the West, if you go to Nepal or India or Japan or tribal cultures, what you find is in these pre-axial, non-axial, non-monotheistic worlds, there is no separation. There is no alienation. There is no Wordsworthian growing up. Nature and man are woven together. This is the world of documented in Philippe Descolat's work and other anthropologists, where nature is alive, where trees and rocks and stones have spirits. So you don't make a distinction. Nature is not your servant and not a slave and not dead, inanimate matter. It is a continuation. For example, in animist societies in Siberia or the Inuit or whatever, when you kill an animal, you beg its pardon and you say you are sorry and you do a ritual, because you haven't just killed some animal, you have killed a spirit, or at least the form of the spirit, and you need to placate the spirit. And the Gurungs do the same thing. They have a ritual, it's called the 9 deer ceremony. And so when a hunter is very successful and they've killed 9 deers, you have to have a big ceremony where you propitiate the spirits of the 9 deer you have killed. So nature is not your servant, and not, this doesn't mean that you treat it well. I mean, you may rape it in the sense of burning down the forests and throwing bombs into the streams and so on, in a way which we would consider tragic. And you have the tragedy of the commons, where much public space is yours. So public space may be littered with rubbish, and you may cut down what we consider to be beautiful trees and so on. But your attitude towards it, your deep commitment to a world which is unified, is different. One of the effects of monotheism, it seems, and perhaps Greek thought, is to make that separation. This is in some ways what Jaspers is talking about, the axial separation. There is a world up there of the supernatural and the world of the natural. And in the world of the natural, man is, as it's all in the Bible, man, God created the animals on the 6th day, and then he created man to be lord over the nature in the 7th day, not as an animal, not as one of them, but as a separate species. So the idea that we are animals, I mean, I remember being thrilled by books which I read by, I think, Dubo or someone, the very human animal, or autobiographies by Peter Medawar, autobiography of a thinking radish or carrot or whatever it was. So, the Darwinian realization that we are not a separate species, which was such a shock to the Victorians. Was your great-grandfather a monkey, Mr. Darwin? Yes, he was. And I'm a monkey. That realization, which we're all having more and more, that not just animals, but also trees and plants and vegetables have an emotional, intelligent life of a kind, the Gaia complex and so on. We are realizing this, but very late. The world is being consumed and burnt down and so on and so on. Now, what we realize that it's part of the costs of success of the scientific revolution, the mechanization, the models of nature as a machine in Newton and the early scientists. But this is the effect which we're seeing all now around us. And that's why there's, great interest in philosophies coming from other parts of the world, which say, no, nature is not a machine, that you need to mix humans and nature. The wilding movement, the fact that my garden now is just wild. I don't mow it. I don't cut down new trees when they come up. I let everything go because I know nature has its own ways of controlling itself. And the garden has done fine without the kind of micro management, which I did, and most people do to their gardens. Well, we're realizing this with farmland, with farming, with the ocean. You know, don't try and micro control it. See it as a living part of extension of yourself, and then we will live in a sustainable world. So that's the lesson you can learn from this hyper separation which has occurred, and the growing realization.
When you look at the current um, movements for, around global warming and stuff like this, do you think that they're still too um, mechanistic in their approaches to how they're going to solve it? Do you think that they haven't gone far enough? Because when I listen to a lot of the policies and stuff, they do still seem to be very scientific in that sense. And the technological fix seems to be the way that they're going about it. Or do you think that actually that's inevitably the way it has to be, that if you want to bring back, if you like, a more enchanted way of looking at nature, it'll be a fusion of both an attitude to nature plus the latest technologies?
Yes, I think I agree with your last point, really, that um, it tends to be because of all our solutions in the past have been, technological. If you have a problem of whatever it is, overpopulation or urbanization, you get a technical fix for it.
Mm.
And so we look to that first. And I think that actually I'm quite optimistic because I think that there will be some macro technical solutions. We're still tinkering around with things like hydrogen energy and this and that. I think there are going to be a few really big breakthroughs like fusion energy or proper carbon capture or whatever, which will suddenly, and we can't foretell them because of Popper's law, we don't know what we'll know, but I think in 5 or 10 years when we look back, we'll say, oh, well, they didn't know that unlimited free, non-polluting energy was discovered in 1925, 2025. And after that, we could desalinate the oceans, we could we could capture all the carbon for free and so on and so on. And those sorts of problems went away.
And do you think also that on the back of this problem, the global ecological crisis we've got, this is an opportunity. There's no reason why you should know, but just thinking about it, do you think that there's an opportunity here for the modern Anglosphere and the non-modern Chinese sphere or the Indian sphere to actually come together, and somehow perhaps this might be the issue that allows us to blend together and actually be able to work together rather than see each other as just confronting civilizations?
I think it might. I mean, basically, if you see a problem which you think you can deal with locally within a nation or a community, then you will try to deal with it like that. What the pandemic has shown as another
Mm.
example, and this has shown, and the migration problems have shown, and the problems of war and continuing war have shown, is that none of the problems you or I face can be dealt with within Britain or even the West. They involve all of us. And when we're faced with a common threat, you would think, though it hasn't always happened, that you would have a common response. Um, but I'm not sure. I mean, recently I went to a good talk by an American who's written a book on the Belt and Road Initiative
Mm.
in China. And it's quite a good analysis, but it's very American. They won't succeed, and their plan is to rule the world kind of assumptions are behind it. No interest in really in Chinese philosophy or why they're doing it, but they're doing it wrong here and right there. Someone um, sensibly asked, who knows a lot about the Silk Road, who's written a book on the Silk Road, said, "Do you think it's pretty successful? Western attempts, there have been, Hillary Clinton and others tried to set up kind of Belt and Road initiatives. None of them have worked at all, and Western aid hasn't really worked. Will the Americans join with the Chinese to make it a better, smooth out things and collaborate with them?" He said, "Oh no, I don't think we'll do that. We wouldn't even consider it.
Mm.
We're in competition. If it succeeds, we fail." Still this zero-sum mentality.
Mm.
But on the other hand, it may happen underneath the surface, because whenever you now get Western people, as we come up to the climate conference, you ask an expert, the BBC asks an expert about, the commitment of different civilizations. And the BBC person says, we've made a wonderful promise in Britain to get rid of everything and down to 1.5. But those Indians and those Chinese, they don't seem to have done very much. They haven't made a promise like that, have they? And if you get someone like John Kerry or someone who knows something about it, they say that's rubbish. They're doing much more than we are. Most of the solar work and panels and so on are made in China. They've done more, even though they're in the middle of their phase that we went through for 200 years of extracting coal. They're promising to get decarbonize in an incredibly short time. And they're doing much more to produce non-polluting energy than anywhere in the West. And they are developing the technologies. The technologies to deal are mostly now coming from China. So I think that basically we will, just as they've absorbed Western technologies to have their industrial revolution, much of Chinese technology will now, we may not like Huawei, but we will probably go with it in the end. And we will go with these systems, even if we feel, as long as they call it something else and it's not too obvious. So I think the pooling of these things. But the other part, which is a change of attitude, is also equally important. Now, not everyone realizes that most, at least perhaps half, of the problem of global warming could be cured overnight if everyone went on to a vegetarian diet. That the production of food for cattle, livestock, and the greenhouse gases emitted by them causes, I've forgotten what percent, but a huge percentage, 30, 40% of the greenhouse gases, at least, not coming from cars and things, but it's coming from because we eat meat. So if over the next 5 years, the government said, we are going to encourage through stick and carrot approach, all vegetables and fruit will become, the price will go right down, the price of meat will go right up.
Mm.
We won't prohibit it at first, but we would expect every British citizen to have at least 2 days a week when they don't eat any meat. We will put a lot of money into what are already extremely good alternative meat products, which Sarah and I eat, and they taste just the same to us. So you will be able to have the thrill of a hamburger or something, but it won't be ham. So basically, we will aim at zero meat slaughtering with all its cruelty and destruction of the environment and the Amazonian forests and all the rest of it within 5 years. Now, if at COP, whatever, they said the world will go vegetarian in 5 years, all the money we're now putting into making new missiles, we'll put 2% of that into making better meat substitutes and into subsidizing the cost of vegetables and so on. Half the climate problem has changed. And it's a change of behavior, but it's only basically a change of going into Sainsbury's and going to the counter where they have the meat substitutes than the one where they have the the joints. Not a very big change, especially if the cooking methods are not too dissimilar, the taste is the same. It's not a big sacrifice. I mean,
Is meat? Are there civilizations which are vegetarian or have been traditionally vegetarian for a long time? Because China's not vegetarian, is it? And neither's.
well, they haven't done it uh, basically usually for ideological reasons, but they are de facto.
Mm,
China and Japan and even Nepal to a certain extent were vegetarian. That is to say,
mm,
you ate hardly any meat
mm,
because there wasn't, they didn't have pasturage and so on. So to take Japan, they did have a taboo on all four-footed land animals.
mm,
You could eat fish, but because of Buddhism and other reasons, you couldn't eat cattle. India, you can't eat cattle. So basically, the Japanese were pescatarians until very recently. It's only after the Second World War that they became big meat eaters. The Chinese, the same, that in northern China, they ate more pig, but no other animals. South of China, really 90%. I mean, on a special feast day, once or twice a year, then you'd have some meat, but very little meat. So, for religious reasons, also in both these cultures, they have downplayed meat. And even in India, traditionally, it's largely vegetarian because of they didn't eat cattle and they didn't. What else would you eat? You'd eat goat, but there weren't so many of them. So, if we moved, basically, if you moved to a, say, a early 20th century Chinese or Japanese or Indian diet, when we lived in the village, as anthropologists, much of our time wasn't. I mean, we didn't have much meat. We'd have an egg, and on special occasions, we'd have some chicken. And if it was a big feast, we'd kill a buffalo. Most of the time, you lived on vegetables and rice, and you can live pretty well on vegetables and rice.